In this video, I break new ground with innovative, revolutionary content, the tier list. We're going to be ranking every Battlefield game from the beginning in chronological order, and I'm not scripting this, I'm just going off the cuff, and I'm just going to give my impressions and thoughts of each title. So grab some popcorn, grab some snacks, settle in. We're going to be talking about the Battlefield series for a while here, so settle in. And I get asked almost daily, and pretty much daily, how and why do you create such incredible YouTube content? And it really is because of viewers like you. And so if you enjoy, like and subscribe, and let's get started with Battlefield 1942. If you look at it now, it's not much to look at, but Battlefield 1942 was revolutionary at the time. Rarely does a franchise start off with as big a bang as Battlefield did with 1942. This was an absolutely revolutionary World War II shooter. Now, there was a bunch of other shooters at the time, contemporary shooters, that were very narrow in scope. And for me, Battlefield was really the first experience with a massive battlefield. I mean, it was an actual battlefield. There was planes, dogfighting above, doing strafing runs on infantry and vehicles, tanks battling it out in the deserts, and it just felt like the ultimate World War II simulator that, coming off the heels of Saving Private Ryan, for example, was pretty much younger me's ideal game. It was really an incredible shooter. Now, that being said, it basically came out in the year 1942, so the graphics and everything has dated really poorly, but, you know, playing it on my old Dell that was basically starting on fire, trying to run it at anything above 12 FPS, it blew my mind. And some of the scale of 1942 hasn't even been matched to this day, even in the franchise. And what I mean by that is there was a couple of maps like Wake Island and Battle of Midway where you could actually pilot submarines, destroyers, the aircraft carrier, you could go beach it and screw your team over. But the scale and just sheer ability for the players to shape the battlefield was unmatched and still really hasn't been matched in the series, which is disappointing. Battlefield 1 probably came the closest with the Turning Tides DLCs and the Behemoths, but even then it just wasn't quite the same, and just this massive sandbox with a bunch of toys thrown in, letting the players go wild. That being said, its shooting mechanics were not as solid as other contemporary shooters, and as iconic as some of its maps are, like Wake Island, most of them were pretty barren landscapes. I mean, that was mostly due to the hardware limitations and the engine limitations at the time, as they were trying to render all of these vehicles and players, and it was just brand new technology, a brand new engine. No one had really done anything at the scale of Battlefield to that point. All that being said, it had some severe flaws, and as an actual shooter, might not have been as fun. I did love the class system, but it really wasn't that fleshed out. There was no customization, and for the most part, the moment-to-moment gameplay was, it was aight. Because of that, I'm just gonna toss it in B. It's good, it's not great, it's not incredible, even though I just sang its praises for like the last 3 minutes. It's okay. Following up with that came Battlefield Vietnam, and that really did feel like more of just an expansion, even though it did change many things. There's one thing I really liked about Battlefield Vietnam. That was, of course, the soundtrack, which is basically, you have to put it in if you do a Vietnam era game. There was working radios, which was really cool, but flying in the Hueys was fun. It also offered vehicle airlifting, which I thought was really awesome, and it was super fun, and definitely a feature that should come back in the series. You could basically pick up a tank or a transport with a transport chopper, and it gave transport choppers another role on the battlefield rather than, 2042's role, which is just a big mobile platform gunship of death. So really, they did a good job with that. The main thing that stands out to me with Battlefield Vietnam was the asymmetrical factions. Now, the Battlefield series has had asymmetrical factions a lot. Pretty much every entry has had that, I think, to an extent, except for a few, but Vietnam definitely took it to the next level, and you kind of have to when you do that conflict. You had the US forces, of course, with a lot of technology and a lot of differences in the military doctrine, so you had tanks and choppers and gunships, and tons of military resources and technologically advanced weapons and guns. And on the other side, the Viet Cong were basically using makeshift anti-tank equipment. You could set traps, and they had mobile spawn platforms, which was really cool. It's basically the ability for the Viet Cong to move their spawn points around, while the US was basically locked onto flags or their base spawn. So as far as the asymmetrical factions went, it was really awesome, and no other entry has taken it that far, where playing as one faction versus the other felt substantially different. So because of that, it didn't really push the envelope from 1942 other than in a few different ways. I'm going to put it at a B. It's a high B. It's good. It wasn't one of my favorites, but it was a fun title. And it introduced choppers and jets, which we know how critically important those are for the Battlefield series going forward. Now, Battlefield 2. I think we're all pretty aware. Of what this title meant for the franchise and for FPS gaming. It's not only one of the cornerstone entries of the series, but I would say a cornerstone FPS and really milestone FPS in the market. We had been just swamped with World War II era entries, so Battlefield 2 bringing Battlefield to the modern era, wow, and did it actually pull it off extremely well. VTOL jets, different classes with all different types of gadgets, commander mode, squads. Battlefield 2's DNA is sprinkled throughout the entirety of the rest of the franchise. It took so many elements from the previous entries and expanded and built upon them to really build what I would consider the foundation of the franchise, and did it in a way that made it so incredibly fun and awesome. Battlefield 2 is one of my favorite entries in the series. However, that being said, it does have significant weaknesses. We all remember Karkand, Strikeout Karkand, legendary map. Battlefield 2 was just full of legendary maps anyway. But the grenade spam, the dolphin diving, the shooting mechanics were really not that great. And I can admit that, even though I absolutely love this entry. I mean, sneaking behind enemy lines is a special, I think they were called Special Ops was the class, with C4 to blow up the artillery, or just planting in on a helicopter and waiting for someone to spawn in and spawn into it, or run to it and get in, or a jet, and just blowing it up right when they took off. That never ever got old. I mean, it was spawn camping, it was cancerous, but it was hilarious. It was amazing. And the new squad tactics where you could mark on the map, you could do different callouts, you could ping, you could do all these sorts of things that we've lost so much of it, and Battlefield 2042 is obviously the best example of that, where we regressed so much from a squad system that came out of the gates hot with voice over IP, kicking. I think you could even rename your squads. I mean, it was almost the entire package. It's actually incredible how well they nailed the squad mechanics right out of the gate. And now here we are, what, 20 years later, and we've regressed? It's actually really sad to see. But the flaws, the dolphin diving, the unstoppable and unkillable jets, the hit registration was pretty bad. I mean, I was on a pretty bad connection. This was one of the first games that I absolutely needed to upgrade my PC to even run, and when I did, I mean, it was awesome. But look at the legacy of the game. I mean, it's still being carried out today with Project Reality, and it had some pretty great DLCs, including Special Forces, which added things like night maps and zip lines. It changed the gameplay quite a bit. And man, whew, Battlefield 2, the more I talk about it, the more I think about it. I was gonna actually go to A tier because it does have a few flaws, but that's nothing in comparison to what it brought to the entry. I mean, the improved physics, just the sheer moment-to-moment gameplay, the insanity, and the chaos of it. I mean, Gulf of Oman 64 player was unmatched, unparalleled. I gotta put it in S tier. This is my list. I'm completely biased. This is an S tier title. Battlefield 2 is absolutely incredible, even with its faults. Now, let's move on to Battlefield 2 Modern Combat. So you console peasants out there weren't completely left out. You did have a Battlefield 2, but it was not necessarily a port. It was completely different. I mean, it was essentially a different game completely. And I remember playing it at my friend's a few times on his Xbox, and all I really remember is the weird switching mechanic. So when you died, you actually jumped in and switched into a different soldier, and it was so strange. But it was kind of fun. It was kind of an interesting mechanic. Other than that, I vaguely remember really muddy textures and graphics. It looked nothing like Battlefield 2, from what I remember. I could be completely wrong, and I'm going to overlay this with gameplay, and I could be completely wrong, but this is just going off the cuff and off of memory. Modern Combat really wasn't a true Battlefield title. I'm going to put it in C tier. Modern Combat was a C tier. I do remember the shooting mechanics were pretty fun, and they did try some cool stuff. That was pretty innovative, and I don't think any game has really done that, where when you die, you can just jump into another soldier. Modern Combat, if that's your favorite entry, I'm sorry. Coming out hot on the heels of Battlefield 2's final DLC, Battlefield 2142 released to pretty good acclaim. Now, I'm very old, and I do remember there was a pretty good outcry that they were rushing. I mean, this came out like almost less than a year after Battlefield 2 came out, maybe just a little over a year, which is pretty crazy to think about now that it's no longer an annual series. Battlefield 2142 is a lot of people's favorite, and I could see why. It's vastly different and a pretty unique entry in the series. It introduced, of course, Titan mode, which is really what everyone remembers, but what I remember from Titan mode is it was epic. It was awesome. You could capture the missile silos. You could launch out of a pod, out of an APC, and just launch right up onto the enemy Titan. So for those that aren't aware, Titan mode, you basically had to capture, it was conquest at first. You captured different points and they were missile silos. The missiles were shooting at these Titans. They were these massive airships that were floating above the battlefield. And you could spawn on the Titan, you could shoot at it, you could shoot out of it, but they had these shields that you had to knock out with those missiles. You could also board the enemy Titan and take it out from within. But once the the shields were down, you'd actually have to board it, and you'd have to go in and basically blow up its reactor or its engine or whatever. And that was how your team won the game. So really epic idea, incredible moments of launching into the Titan and like fighting in the hallways of this futuristic airship. The execution though, and everyone remembers rushing out, and they even showed in the trailer, you set the bomb and detonate it and you rush out and barely escape at the last minute, and everyone remembers those moments. What no one seems to remember online is how janky and buggy this mode was. I mean, it was absolutely a mess. The Titans trying to run on them was like an exercise in frustration. I just remember rubber banding everywhere, even with a pretty good connection at that point. I was a pretty dedicated gamer at that point. Man, it was janky. It was really janky. The walkers were cool, I'll give you that. The walker vehicles. Titan mode is remembered with really, really thick rose-colored glasses, in my opinion, in the online community. I'm not discounting the experiences anyone had, because they were awesome, but it really wasn't as epic as everyone remembers because it was just so janky. But credit to DICE for taking a swing. It's actually pretty cool. I'd love to see them return to this conflict in the future in the next entry, for example. Caveat that DICE can even pull it off anymore. But Battlefield 2142, I may get some flack for this. I'm actually gonna put it, it's in the B tier. It's in the B tier. Didn't quite make it to A. Very, very janky, but it had some incredibly cool ideas. The one thing that doesn't stick with me is the maps. I don't remember any of the maps from 2142. I think it had maybe one or two that were noteworthy. But other than that, I mean, most of them were just kind of snowy landscapes from what I remember, especially in the DLC. So nothing to really stick in my mind. Battlefield, Bad Company. Now, I didn't really play this one as much. Again, I was primarily a PC gamer, so this was another one that I played at a friend's just a few times on console. Bad Company, of course, introduced destruction and had a very fun campaign mode. I don't think it was the very first Battlefield with the campaign mode. I think that was Battlefield 2 Modern Combat, so congratulations, console peasants. You get another entry that this one's actually pretty good. This one's actually pretty sick. It has really likable characters, it had a pretty fun campaign, it introduced destruction, and really was the baseline for a lot of the elements of Battlefield going forward. I think it was a proof of concept in a lot of ways, and really didn't capture a lot of the more tactical or more in-depth elements of previous entries. So I'm going to put Battlefield Bad Company in the C tier. I might get quite a bit of hate for that, but it's my list, and so let me know in the comments how much you hate me for that one. Battlefield Heroes. The most incredible entry in the franchise. It's going up into S. There's no doubt about it. Actually, no, it's going in the trash. I know online a lot of people remember Battlefield Heroes fondly as well. No shame to you if you do. I mean, I think it had some very predatory practices as far as its free skins. It was a free-to-play ripoff of Team Fortress 2. That's all it was. That's why I put it in the trash. I loved Team Fortress 2 at the time, and when Battlefield Heroes was announced, I was disgusted. I was disgusted to my core at how blatant they were trying to capture the audience of Team Fortress 2 with the art style and with the gameplay, and it made me sick. So it is a trash tier title, and I will die on that hill. It just has no place in the Battlefield franchise. Battlefield 1943, once again the console peasants get an entry that never came to PC. It was one of those like Xbox arcade games, I think. It was also built, I should have called that out, the Bad Company did introduce the Frostbite engine, which is again the baseline for basically the entire series going forward, introducing destruction and stuff like that. So Battlefield 1943 was pretty awesome. I mean, it had, I think, only a few maps. It was essentially an arcade title, so very, very bare bones, and I think it was like $15 or something. It's not a mainline entry in the franchise. It was just them attempting to capitalize on this smaller arcade where they could cut costs and making a smaller title, almost like a AA studio made a Battlefield game. It did have destruction though, and it was kind of cool to see Iwo Jima, I think, and 2 other maps, maybe 3, in the Frostbite engine, and it kind of made me super hyped for Battlefield to return to World War II with a full title, which of course we wouldn't realize for quite a few years after this. Again, not one I played a whole lot, but what I did play was actually really enjoyable. It was actually pretty cool to play a Frostbite engine World War II Battlefield, even though it was pretty small in scope, and I don't even know if it did anything super unique. It was alright. It was alright. That's a C tier. In my experience, it was alright. Just okay. Battlefield Bad Company 2. Whew, okay. Gotta take a breather for this next one. Because Battlefield Bad Company 2, this title, this game changed how I enjoyed first-person shooters. Bad Company 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. They did so much right while at the same time stripping out so many elements of Battlefield. It's honestly shocking to me. There's like that report that DICE still doesn't understand why Bad Company 2 was so successful or great, and I honestly believe it. If you just looked at like a bullet point list, less players, no prone, no jets, streamlined classes, I mean, on the face of it, just as again, a bullet point list, it's missing a lot of staple Battlefield features. But something about the map design, rush, of course, and the destruction, the gunplay, the movement, the vehicles, it just came together in one of the most beautiful packages Battlefield has ever put together, or DICE has ever put together. Bad Company 2 is not only one of the best FPS games I've ever played, it's one of the best multiplayer and games I've ever played in my life. It's not my overall favorite entry in the series as far as just like being the complete package, but as far as overall enjoyment and just sheer fun, Bad Company 2 is pretty much unmatched for me. It was definitely the most fun title. In a moment-to-moment gameplay, blasting a hole through with an M203, rolling in with a shotgun, sniping with shotgun slugs, the M24 sniper, the Gold Magnum, the map design, Erica Harbor. I mean, it all just came together in such an incredible package. It wasn't all bangers, not that the maps weren't all bangers, there was a few weak maps, and the destruction was kind of overdone in some parts, where there were certain maps where you could just like completely level any and all cover, which is kind of cool, but at the same time actually really sucked if you were like an attacker. But as far as just, again, moment-to-moment gameplay and enjoyment, Battlefield Bad Company 2 is absolutely an S-tier game. And that was even before the Vietnam DLC came out, which was incredible. Absolutely incredible. One of the best DLCs ever released for the series. It introduced so many new elements. It brought back the asymmetrical gameplay in a lot of ways. It had an incredible soundtrack, style. It was so much fun. It unfortunately died pretty quickly, from what I remember. I mean, I remember loving it, but I don't remember playing it that long. But Bad Company 2 persisted for quite a while. They're shutting down the servers. I'm confident and hopeful that the community is going to keep this game alive, and I hope it does, because Bad Company 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. S tier title. Battlefield, play for free. I never played it, and definitely not for free. It's trash. It's going into the trash. Let me know in the comments if you played Battlefield Play for free. Everything I've heard about it is bad. I've never heard anything good about it, and so it's going in the trash tier. I've actually never played it. It's still going in the trash. Sorry. Battlefield 3. The hype for Battlefield 3 was pretty much unmatched. I mean, I'm coming off of Bad Company 2, which, as you just heard, was one of my favorite shooters of all time, and Battlefield 3 comes out with a trailer that is just absolutely mind-blowing. The initial reveal trailer, I mean, the visuals didn't look real. They just straight up did not look like a video game. It looked like real life. The movement, the animations, the effects, the aesthetics, the weapon design and models, I mean, everything just looked top tier. The audio design, the destruction, all of it was just incredible. Like, this was the sequel to Battlefield 2. This was the biggest sequel Battlefield had ever done. And then they dropped the Caspian Border multiplayer trailer. I can't even express how many times I watched that trailer. I mean, I'm gonna put it overlaid this because it is one of the most legendary trailers done by the series. I have never been more hyped for a Battlefield title than I was for Battlefield 3. And fortunately, in most, if not pretty much every aspect for me, it delivered. Battlefield 3 is an absolutely legendary game. I know there's a lot of faults people take with the shooting mechanics, the bloom, the suppression, the blue filter. I don't care. I love all of that. It's a gritty realism that, for me, has only been realized in Battlefield 1, and I really wish the series could get back to that just hardcore Battlefield feeling. It had, bar none, some of the best DLC in the series. There was a lot of flack caught for close quarters. It was basically viewed as like Battlefield trying to copy Call of Duty, which, yeah, you could argue that, but with the destruction and the map design, I didn't even care. It was so much fun. It was so much fun to play those close quarter maps. Aftermath contains by far my favorite maps in the entire series, these urban environments torn apart, war-torn, and earthquake-torn, and just all kinds of torn. All just torn all over the place, and it just made some of the most incredibly fun and engaging and intense engagements I've ever had in a game. But again, everything from audio and visual design to map design to vehicle gameplay, I mean, this was a watershed moment in the industry. This was a absolutely revolutionary title. It was so far ahead and above any of the competitors in both visual design and audio design that, I mean, it just set the bar. It just set the bar that Battlefield itself has kind of faltered at. It can't even reach this level for me. Battlefield 3 is absolutely an S-tier game. I have 3 S-tiers, and I don't care. I stand by all of them. I will die on these hills. These are S-tier games. And it also has the S tier map for me, my favorite map in the entire series, Return to Karkand in Battlefield 3. I don't even know how many hours I played of a 24/7 server I found of that map because I just enjoyed it so much. It's pretty much everything I want out of an urban map in a Battlefield game. I can't think of anything I would have changed. On to Battlefield 4, definitely the one I have the most hours in, with Battlefield 1 probably following, and then Bad Company 2 and Battlefield 3 following that. Battlefield 4 basically took the formula of Battlefield 3 and just refined it in many, many ways. They dropped the blue filter, they lowered suppression, they tweaked a lot of the gunplay, and as far as just returning to a very active and modern feeling Battlefield, Battlefield 4 to this day remains probably your best bet. If you want to capture that classic Battlefield feeling and just enjoy it, Battlefield 4 is definitely your best bet there. It is for many people their absolutely favorite entry, and I can see that because, again, it just took the Battlefield 3 gameplay and really refined it in a lot of ways, but for me it actually lost a couple of things. It lost the stellar map design of Battlefield 3. I think Battlefield 4 actually had some of the weakest launch base maps in the entire series, sadly. Some of the DLCs were actually excellent. I did enjoy quite a few of the maps released in the DLCs, but as far as base maps go, just wasn't impressed. Battlefield 4 just really didn't impress me. The Levolution, while cool, was kind of a gimmick. I mean, everyone remembers the Siege of Shanghai skyscraper falling Levolution, which for me completely ruined the flow and feeling of that map, by the way. I mean, as cool and as iconic and as awe-inspiring as that event was, just kind of killed the map for me. But other ones like Langkang Dam, or however you say it, and Gulman Railway with the bombs, I mean, they really didn't affect it at all. Flood Zone was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. And had some really good maps. I like Zavad, is of course a classic, and they did so much. What I love about Battlefield 4 is how much engagement they had with the community. They had the community test servers or test environment where you could basically test out patches and leave feedback. They developed a map from the ground up with the community, and community engagement was never higher than it was with Battlefield 4, which was kind of a silver lining to the black cloud that the game released in a completely broken state. I mean, the launch Battlefield 4 was an absolute embarrassment. So when I say it refined the gameplay, I'm not talking technically, because technically the game was an absolute mess, and for many people it didn't work. For me, I didn't have too many issues, but I did have quite a few crashes and memory leaks and all of that. But for some people, it was absolutely unplayable for like 6 months. So I kind of have to ding it for that. I have to ding it for the map design. I love Battlefield 4, don't get me wrong. It sits at a solid and very high A, and it doesn't quite hit that S tier for me. May get some more hate for that, let me know why. Battlefield Hardline. Now, if you watch my channel, one of my biggest videos was my first time even playing Battlefield Hardline like 2 years ago now, and I had never played it before. So returning to it now, obviously it has a very small and tight-knit and, let's be honest, hardcore community, so jumping in now is not really probably the experience that someone jumping in back when it released had at all. For me, I was just way too involved into Battlefield 4, and Battlefield Hardline just came out so soon after. It wasn't a Battlefield to me. It didn't have the aesthetic, it didn't have the style. It was cops and robbers, and I just felt that was weird and kind of lame, to be honest, and so I never even gave it a chance. But jumping into it now, it actually has a lot of really cool elements. It basically is Battlefield 4 as far as gameplay is concerned. Obviously, there's a lot of different types of gadgets, there's a lot of civilian things, there's different game modes, like Hotwire is super fun, but the bones and the structure and the body of it are basically Battlefield 4 with a cops and robbers skin on it. That being said, they did do quite a bit to differentiate it. I still don't love the theme. I think if they had just called it Hardline and removed the Battlefield from the title, obviously you're sacrificing some of that IP recognition, but you could be creating a brand new franchise that could have blown up. Who knows? Maybe there's like a Hardline 5 at this point that's massive, and maybe slid into that niche to be more of a direct competitor for Call of Duty. A couple things I really enjoyed from Hardline. Some of the maps are pretty cool. I like that they're pretty unique. You're like in a small town, or you're raiding a bank, or you're in the streets. Pretty different from what we had experienced in previous entries, and it kind of needed to be given the setting. All that being said, Battlefield Hardline, while solid in a lot of ways, just to me isn't really a full Battlefield title, and because of that I have to rank it pretty low. Now I'm sure I'm going to get absolutely hated for this. It's going in the D tier. It's going below Battlefield Modern Combat solely because of the theme. Gameplay wise, I'd probably rank it up a little higher, but this is the Battlefield tier list. And it's really fun, but they really should have just made it its own franchise. So, sorry, D tier. Battlefield 1 is an interesting one. If you've watched my channel for any period of time or watched my other videos, you can probably assume where I'm going to put this already. But there is a few caveats here. Now, Battlefield 1, if you're looking for spectacle, atmosphere, immersion, which are kind of the two most overkilled words when describing this game, but they're true, and just the sheer scale and feeling of being in a conflict, in a war zone, in a war setting, in a historical setting, Battlefield 1 for me is pretty much unmatched. Now, there are some more hardcore shooters like Hell Let Loose and other ones that are a little more tactical, maybe a little more realistic, but the production value and audio design, visual design of Battlefield 1 is absolutely unmatched for me. As far as that goes, as far as being just a game you can just immerse yourself in and enjoy on the face of it, Battlefield 1 is my favorite entry in the franchise. If you're looking for the tightest and most advanced shooting mechanics or the highest skill curve, Battlefield 1 is not it. It's actually very casual. Sniping is super easy, which is probably why I enjoy it so much. The guns, while inaccurate, I mean, they have very distinct playstyles and roles on the battlefield, which I enjoy a lot, but the shooting mechanics are pretty basic, and they actually did a lot of like Battlefrontification of Battlefield 1 in the UI elements and how vehicles worked, how planes flew. They just simplified and streamlined a lot of the game. Behemoths were a way for, if you're on a losing team, to try and catch up. So really the first kind of like catching up mechanic that the series had ever had. So in many ways, yes, Battlefield 1 is a very casual Battlefield game. But on the other hand, as far as presentation, atmosphere, etc., goes, it is unparalleled. I love Battlefield 1. It has some of my favorite design elements in a shooter. I love getting muddy in the trenches. I love the effects of your gun as you crawl. It gets mud, it collects rain, it's wet. There's night maps, bolt action rifles, bullets zipping overhead, people rushing you with clubs, melee combat had a revamp. I mean, it's just such an incredible feat to what they did to not only make World War I represented as a Battlefield game, but make it engaging and as fun as it is. It's not 100% accurate, of course. There's like prototype weapons that aren't even developed and weren't even used, but they kind of had to make some sacrifices in the sake of gameplay, and I'm actually pretty happy with the sacrifices they made. I wouldn't have minded more bolt-action rifle gameplay because I just think it's super fun, and maybe some of the more ridiculous like sights could have been removed and stuff like that, but really Battlefield 1 is almost the complete package. I love every DLC. They Shall Not Pass, In the Name of the Tsar, Turning Tides. I mean, they all added some absolutely incredible maps. I love that they added new factions and new weapons, and you just got tons of it. In the Name of the Tsar added so much to the game, and all these different elements that really did change the game in pretty significant ways. So as far as just enjoyment and jumping back in, I still jump in pretty regularly to Battlefield 1 and love it every time and fall in love with it again over and over. It also, of course, had the most legendary reveal trailer in the Battlefield series. 2042 came close, and we know how that worked out. This actually lived up to that. Absolutely loved it. I love almost every aspect of Battlefield 1. For me, it's an S tier. I have a lot of S tiers. I just realized I actually love a lot of entries in this franchise. I'm weighted pretty heavily here at the top, but luckily, we've reached Battlefield 5 and Battlefield 2042. Battlefield 5 is a very frustrating game. It, of course, had one of the worst marketing cycles of any Battlefield game. It suffered from a very apparent cohesive vision, unlike Battlefield 1, which was pretty much cohesive in all of its elements. Battlefield 5 was all over the board. That being said, I loved a lot of the gameplay elements they brought in. I love the movement. The shooting felt absolutely great. Really rewarding. It felt skillful. I love the vehicle gameplay. I liked how they had limited ammo and the repair system and all the damage systems that could happen. Squad Reinforcements was one of the best additions to the franchise, even though it did have some pretty major flaws, like the squad leader being the only one that could do it. But still, the ability for your squad to contribute as a team together and to get rewarded and get a reward as a squad was really, really awesome. Something they definitely should have brought back for Battlefield 2042, but they barely brought squads back, so that was asking for too much. Fortifications were okay, pretty gimmicky. I know a lot of people really like that feature. For me, they were pretty gimmicky. You needed more ability to build what you wanted. What's frustrating with Battlefield 5 is, of course, how they killed it off, and its live service model was a complete and utter failure. I actually loved Firestorm, and despite its flaws, and they just killed it. They completely failed to deliver the same level and quality of content that other Battlefield games had seen. And, I mean, they dropped the Pacific right at the end, the best content drop the game had ever had. It revitalized it, brought such awesome gameplay elements and maps into the game, and then they just killed it. They ended support, and it just left a really, really sour taste in a lot of players' mouths. So, despite my enjoyment of it, I really do enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay a lot. I still absolutely hate the visual design of the game in many ways. I mean, Captain Crunch, I'll just never get over that skin. The live service model being a complete and utter failure. Battlefield 5 It's actually going to go in the C tier. It's not quite D. It's obviously not trash, because I did enjoy a lot of it. It's okay. It would be much higher if it didn't represent a trend in the Battlefield series that has carried forward into what we know is absolutely the worst entry in the series. No spoilers, we're on to Battlefield 2042. Okay, well, this is no surprise. Battlefield 2042 is absolute trash. It is the worst entry in the series, and it is an absolute disappointment and disgusts me to my core. That being said, it has a few redeemable qualities. I'm trying to think of one right now. The vehicle call-ins is okay. Vehicle call-ins are alright. Some of the gadgets are okay. The specialists are pure trash. The weapons are boring. The maps are the worst in the entire series. The live service model is a complete joke, an utter failure. The visuals are ugly. The visual design is ugly. The aesthetic is awful. The menus and UI are garbage. The audio design is alright. The vehicles are boring and they suck. And the vehicle model and how you actually spawn into one is terrible. It's an absolute joke of an entry. You look at those S tier games. Can you imagine being an employee at DICE Studios and you walk past I know they in the office there at DICE they have posters of the past Battlefield titles. Can you imagine walking past Battlefield 2, Battlefield Bad Company, Battlefield 3 and 4 to go work on 2042? And that's what you're working on? It was apparent that any talent or anyone that knew how to work on Frostbite and to make these things work had left long ago, and the game has completely and utterly failed, in my opinion. I still have jumped in and made videos, and I enjoy different aspects. It had Battlefield Portal, which had so much promise and has been all but abandoned. It had the stupid Hazard Zone, which was completely abandoned and had even less going for it than Firestorm. 2042 is the worst entry in the series. It's an absolute shame because I was very hyped for it. It seemed like a return to form, and they absolutely bamboozled us. They goofed us with the marketing. So yeah, it's absolute trash. It's the trashiest of the trash. If I had a trash tier below trash, it would be in that trash. That's it. Every title in the series with the definitive tier list. Let me know how wrong I am. I know I've weighted it pretty heavily to the S tier. This is my personal opinion as someone that has loved the series for over 20 years at this point, and holy crap, I'm old. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed. That's it for me. Until next time.